What if memory could lie? Not just yours, but everyone's. Imagine attending a quiet academic conference and casually mentioning Nelson Mandela's death in a South African prison in the 1980s. To your surprise, people nod in agreement. They remember it too, the televised funeral, the global mourning, the impassioned eulogies. But here's the twist. Mandela didn't die then. He was released in 1990, led his country out of apartheid, and became president. That chilling realization happened to researcher Fiona Broom in 2009. What followed wasn't just a curiosity, it was the birth of something far stranger, a phenomenon she called the Mandela Effect, a mass memory anomaly where countless people share the same vivid, specific recollection. That turns out to be false. At first, it seemed like an isolated glitch in the collective mind. But the more Broom documented these cases, the more she uncovered a pattern. Thousands of people came forward, not with hazy feelings or vague dreams, but with strikingly detailed memories of events that never happened. Mandela's death wasn't just one person's confusion. It was a memory echoed by millions, anchored in emotion, certainty, and even school lessons. How could so many minds be wrong in the same way? Psychologists began to take notice. Studies found that people recalling these false memories weren't uncertain, they were confident. Their stories aligned. The scenes they described, a widow's speech, footage of world leaders in mourning, were nearly identical, even though no such footage exists. Brain scans revealed something even more unsettling. The neural pathways activated during these memories matched those triggered by true experiences. The Mandela Effect wasn't just about a single misremembered event. It exposed something deeper, a crack in the foundations of how we perceive reality itself. If our most sacred faculty, memory, can betray us en masse, then what anchors us to the truth? This wasn't about conspiracy. There were no sinister forces rewriting history, no shadowy edits to the past. Instead, what emerged was far more human and far more haunting. A glimpse into the possibility that memory isn't a fixed recording, but a living, fallible narrative written by emotion, repetition, and expectation. And once we accept that, we must ask, how many of our truths are built on illusions we all happen to share? This series explores 10 of the most striking Mandela Effect cases, not as puzzles to be solved, but as stories to be understood. From cartoon bears with shifting names to quotes never spoken, from distorted geography to phantom deaths, we will walk through the landscape of collective memory where reality bends, not with lies, but with the truth we thought we knew. Because in the end, this isn't just a story about memory. It's about who we are when the facts slip away, and what remains when certainty dissolves into mist. Our journey begins where reason ends, at the edge of the mirror. It began with a mirror, or rather the words spoken to one. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? The phrase echoes across generations, etched into the fabric of childhood. It's in books, costumes, parodies. So when someone points out that the iconic Disney line is actually magic mirror on the wall, disbelief follows like a shadow. People don't just remember the words. They hear them in the voice of the evil queen. They see her standing before the ornate frame, lips curling in icy arrogance as she recites those familiar lines. Mirror, mirror, not magic mirror. And yet, in the 1937 Disney film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the queen says, magic mirror, every time. The discovery of this discrepancy hit the internet like a tremor in 2012. Forums lit up with confusion and defiance. People dug through childhood memories, swore by their old VHS tapes, even scoured merchandise. It had to be mirror, mirror, they insisted. I remember it, I heard it, I saw it. But they hadn't. Dr. Henry Reuger, a specialist in memory research, studied this case and declared it one of the most widespread collective false memories ever documented. When surveyed, Over 85% of people familiar with the film recalled the incorrect line. And the strangest part? The original Brothers Grimm tale does use "mirror, mirror," but Disney deliberately changed it. That should explain everything, but it doesn't, because the memory isn't of a storybook, it's of a film. The voice, the animation, the echo, all so vivid in the mind, and it isn't just misremembered. It feels retrieved, like a buried recording. Brain imaging confirms this. People accessing this false quote show activation in auditory memory regions, as though they are hearing a sound that doesn't exist. This suggests something powerful. Memory doesn't just record fact, it recreates experience, and sometimes it favors the version that feels right over the one that is right. There's even a rhythm to it. Mirror, mirror flows with poetic symmetry. It feels more magical, more memorable. So, perhaps over time, the brain reshaped the line, smoothing it into something more resonant, more lyrical. Then culture ran with it, repeating, reinforcing, embedding it into toys and television until the false version overwhelmed the original. The case of the mirror reveals a deeper truth. Memory and culture are not separate. They feed one another. When enough people misremember something the same way, that memory becomes a kind of cultural artifact, a shadow of what never was. So we're left with a riddle. If everyone remembers it wrong, does that memory become a truth of its own? Perhaps the most haunting part isn't that the line was misquoted. It's that millions of us can still hear it, clear as day, in a voice that never said it. And that voice whispers something more than words. It reminds us that memory is a mirror, but one that reflects not just what was, but what we needed it to be. Next, we visit a family of bears whose name changed, or did it? It's a name that once felt as familiar as bedtime. The Berenstain Bears. For generations of children, the beloved bear family lived on bedroom shelves and library carts, teaching gentle lessons about honesty, kindness, and growing up. But for millions of readers, something doesn't add up. The name, spelled with an E, is wrong. It always was Berenstein, wasn't it? Only it wasn't. In every official record, from the first book printed in 1962 to modern reissues, the name is spelled Berenstain, with an A. Stan and Jan Berenstain, not Berenstein. And yet, the shock people experience when they rediscover this fact is overwhelming. Internet forums are filled with confusion. Adults who grew up reading the books recount checking their old copies, certain they'd find proof. Instead, they find Berenstain. Not one or two books, all of them. How can a name we saw hundreds of times now appear foreign, even incorrect? Dr. Cynthia Lieberman, a psychologist at Northwestern, surveyed over 5,000 adults. 68% remembered the name with an E. And it's not just the spelling. They remember pronouncing it that way, correcting others, even arguing about it. Some insist they saw different versions, perhaps a misprint, a publisher's change, or even a parallel timeline. That last theory, far-fetched as it may sound, reveals the emotional weight behind the memory. For many, this isn't a simple typo. It feels like a rupture in the continuity of childhood. A crack in something once believed to be unchanging. False memories often emerge from moments of certainty. And spelling is an easy place for the mind to play tricks. We associate Stein with common surnames, with familiarity. Our brains autocorrect toward what we expect, what feels right. And when millions of people expect the same thing, the false memory grows roots. But the Berenstain Bears case goes further. It isn't just misremembering. It's conviction. People swear by their memories. They recount buying books, watching cartoons, even seeing merchandise spelled the correct way. Some report family debates with their children, the kids pointing at the A while the parents refuse to believe their own eyes. That disbelief hints at something fragile in us all, the need for our memories to be reliable, especially the ones tied to comfort, childhood, and home. When those memories shift, it can feel like the ground beneath us has moved. The books haven't changed, the timeline hasn't split, but the name in our minds, the one we trusted, no longer matches reality. So what does that say about the mind? Perhaps memory isn't just a record of the past, but a story we tell ourselves to make sense of it. And when that story is shared across millions, it becomes a myth, a cultural truth that no amount of evidence can undo. Next, we turn to a song and a missing line that millions still swear they've heard, ringing in stadiums and hearts alike. It ends with a rise, a swell of voices, fists in the air, and one final line echoing across the crowd. "We are the champions of the world." Except it doesn't. In Queen's original studio recording of the iconic anthem, those last 4 words, "of the world," never appear at the end. The song simply closes on "We are the champions," fading into silence. No triumphant declaration, no cinematic finale. Just an absence that feels, to millions, utterly wrong. And yet the memory persists. Sports teams chant it. Films and commercials use it. Fans sing it aloud at concerts, sure that they're reciting the ending as Freddie Mercury sang it. But when played back, the studio version offers no such resolution. Dr. Julia Shaw, a specialist in memory illusion, found this case particularly striking because of its emotional clarity. When asked to finish the lyrics, 80% of people include "of the world," not out of guesswork, but certainty. This false memory carries weight. People remember how it made them feel, the exhilaration, the unity, the sense of victory. That emotional climax seems inseparable from the line itself. So its absence feels like a betrayal of what we know. There is some nuance. "Of the world" does appear earlier in the song. No time for losers, 'cause we are the champions of the world, but not at the end. It's a lyrical echo that got misfiled in memory, relocated to the song's finale because it just feels like it belongs there. Live performances sometimes did include those words at the end, adding to the confusion. But the version etched into millions of minds, the one replayed in sports montages and victory laps, is the studio cut. And it ends without the final punch. Why does the mind fill in that blank? Because memory isn't passive, it's generative. It seeks coherence, rhythm, and emotional payoff. Songs especially live in both sound and feeling. When we recall them, we don't just summon words, we summon the emotion those words delivered. And when memory finds a gap, it fills it with what should be there. That's what makes this case so compelling. People aren't just remembering wrong, they're remembering better. Their version feels more complete, more satisfying, more right. So what happens when the truth lacks the drama we assign to it? We invent a better ending. This isn't deceit, it's storytelling. It's the mind trying to close the loop with a flourish to give the song, and ourselves, the ending we deserve. The Queen misremembering doesn't challenge our knowledge of lyrics. It challenges our understanding of how memory works. Not as a tape recorder, but as a playwright. And in that space between fact and flourish, between silence and crescendo, we find something distinctly human. Next, we revisit a moment frozen in tragedy, an assassination remembered by a nation, but missing 2 passengers. A motorcade rolls through Dallas, the sun is high, the air electric. Then, the shots, the chaos. The unforgettable moment that seared itself into the American consciousness, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Ask people what they remember. They'll tell you the image is clear. A 4-seat convertible, JFK and Jackie in the back, 2 figures in front, perhaps Secret Service, maybe the driver. That's the scene carved into memory. But history says otherwise. In photographs, films, and every official account, the limousine held 6 passengers. President Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy, Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie, plus the driver and another agent. 6 people, not 4. The discovery of this discrepancy in online forums decades later sparked disbelief. For many, the Zapruder film, the famous home movie capturing the assassination, appeared changed. When did the car get longer, some asked? Where did these other people come from? Dr. James Lampin, who studies historical memory distortion, explored this phenomenon and found something unsettling. Nearly 40% of Americans over 50 recalled only 4 people in the car. And the more they believed in their memory, the more resistant they were to photographic evidence. Why? Because our brains don't remember like cameras. They remember like editors. In moments of trauma, our minds simplify. They focus on the central figures, the president, the first lady. Details outside that emotional spotlight fade or are never encoded at all. Early media reports, documentaries, and dramatizations often reinforce this narrowed view. The narrative became about them, and the mind followed suit. But this goes deeper than omission. People remember seeing a smaller car. They recall reenactments, diagrams, even textbooks that supported their version. And when confronted with footage showing otherwise, they feel disoriented, as though history itself had shifted. Memory researchers have tested this dissonance using virtual recreations. Even when shown the historically accurate 6-person car, participants responded more emotionally to the incorrect 4-seat version. Their minds clung to the image shaped not by facts, but by feeling. This is the haunting truth. The more profound the emotion, the more likely our memories are to be distorted. Tragedy doesn't preserve clarity, it rewrites it. So when we look back at Dealey Plaza and see fewer people in the car than were actually there, we're not just misremembering, we're remembering what our hearts could hold, and nothing more. This collective amnesia isn't a flaw. It's a mirror of how we process shock, grief, and loss. But it does force us to ask how much of what we think we know about history is shaped less by fact and more by the emotional lens through which we viewed it. When the image becomes iconic, it becomes untouchable, even when the evidence contradicts it. Next, we pull back from people to the shape of the world itself, a continent that moved when no one was watching. Picture the globe, North America at the top, tapering down into South America, straight, aligned, a vertical continuation of the landmass. That's how many of us first saw it, how we sketched it in school, how we imagined the Americas connected. Only, that map is wrong. Geographically, South America is not directly beneath North America. It's shifted east, so far, in fact, that most of the continent sits east of Florida. Yet millions of people from countries around the world remember it otherwise. This isn't a matter of bad geography education. In 2014, researchers began noticing that students and adults consistently place South America too far west on blank maps. Dr. Sarah Cream-Reger, a spatial memory expert, studied this anomaly and found that the misplacement wasn't random. It followed a remarkably consistent pattern. People didn't just guess wrong, they remembered a world that doesn't exist. International surveys confirmed the same error across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. The mental image of the 2 continents stacked neatly, one above the other, was nearly universal and deeply ingrained. What could explain such widespread misremembering? One clue lies in the maps we grew up with. Simplified projections flattened to fit textbooks and classroom walls. These maps often distorted spatial relationships to create a more orderly image. But those distortions weren't just visual, they became mental templates. And once formed, those templates proved stubborn. The shock many people feel when they see an accurate map isn't just confusion. It's disbelief. as if the continents had quietly shifted while we weren't looking. I remember it differently, they say. I know what I saw. Neurological studies suggest their confidence isn't misplaced. The same brain regions activated during accurate geographical recall light up when people access these false memories. Their internal maps feel just as real, even when they're wrong. What's more, these errors persist even when they're corrected. Some people express frustration when flight paths or time zones don't match their mental geography. Their expectations, shaped by faulty memory, override lived experience. It's tempting to laugh this off as a trivia mistake, but the implications go deeper. If our sense of the shape of the world can be wrong, and not just individually but collectively, what else might we misremember in unison? Geography was supposed to be objective, unchanging. But even here, the mind edits reality to match its narrative. North above south, order over complexity. And in that quiet rearrangement, something profound is revealed, that the maps in our minds often matter more than the maps on the wall. Next, we arrive at a crossroads in memory and media. A lone man, a line of tanks, and a moment the world remembers differently. A wide boulevard, a column of tanks. And a man, small, unarmed, standing defiantly in their path. It's one of the most iconic images of the 20th century. Tank Man, as he came to be known, captured the world's attention during the 1989 pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square. To many, it symbolized the power of a single individual against the weight of oppression. But here's the fracture in memory. Millions remember him dying. They recall the tanks rolling forward, crushing him beneath their treads. News broadcasts showing the moment. The horror, the silence, a martyrdom etched into history. Yet that's not what happened. In every surviving video, the tanks stop. The man climbs atop the lead vehicle, speaks briefly to someone inside, then steps away. Eventually, he is pulled into the crowd, his fate uncertain but alive. Still, the death persists in memory. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, a leading expert in false memory, studied this phenomenon and found that roughly 35% of people who remember the image believe the man was killed. Their memories are vivid and wrong. They don't just remember a feeling. They remember specifics: the crunch of metal, the cut to black, the reaction from newscasters. Many describe the event as a formative moment, a brutal lesson in authoritarian violence. Only it never happened. What causes a peaceful outcome to be remembered as a tragedy? Part of the answer lies in context. The 1989 protests ended in a massacre. Hundreds, possibly thousands, were killed when the Chinese military stormed the square. That violence colored the way people interpreted every image, including the tank man. In such a setting, survival felt implausible, and so the mind rewrote the story. Media portrayals may have contributed. Dramatizations and documentaries often emphasize the danger, the looming violence. In the absence of a confirmed identity or fate, viewers filled in the blanks, emotionally, predictively. Death felt like the only fitting end. Studies show that when people recall this moment, the brain areas tied to trauma and emotion light up. Their recollections don't just mimic real memories, they carry the emotional weight of truth. It's memory shaped not by what was, but by what should have been in the mind's logic. The expectation of brutality became a remembered reality. The Tank Man case forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. When history is incomplete, how much of what we remember is guided by our feelings, our fears, our outrage, rather than fact? Sometimes the story that survives is the one that hurts the most. And in the shadow of that story, the truth, quieter, less dramatic, but no less powerful, can disappear. Next, we enter the world of games and gentlemen and a wealthy icon who wore something he never actually had. He's instantly recognizable, a portly man with a top hat, a twirling mustache, and, of course, a monocle. Or so we thought. The Monopoly mascot, Rich Uncle Pennybags, has been a fixture of childhood game nights and pop culture for generations. He's shown sprinting with a bag of money, lounging atop community chest cards, and grinning from billboards and costumes. Yet the one detail most people remember, his monocle, doesn't exist. He has never worn one. Not in any official artwork, not on the game box, not in decades of branding. Still, for millions of people, the monocle is as essential to his image as his hat or cane. They remember seeing it, drawing it, even mimicking it during Halloween parties. In 2017, the revelation surfaced in online discussions about the Mandela Effect, sparking widespread disbelief. People scoured vintage game sets, old commercials, and childhood photos, convinced they'd find proof of the missing monocle. But the trail led nowhere. Dr. Kimberly Wade, a psychologist who studies memory illusions, investigated this phenomenon and discovered a powerful pattern. When asked to draw the Monopoly Man from memory, over 80% of participants included a monocle. The confidence was unwavering and entirely incorrect. So how did this phantom monocle become part of the collective image? One theory points to visual blending. The brain, seeking patterns, confuses Pennybags with similar figures, like Mr. Peanut, the planter's mascot, who does wear a monocle. Both are symbols of wealth and old-world elegance. Their features, hat, cane, suit, overlap just enough for the monocle to slip in unnoticed. But this isn't just about visual association, it's about expectation. A monocle suggests affluence, eccentricity, sophistication, everything the Monopoly Man represents. The mind completes the picture, inserting the detail that fits the archetype. And when millions do it simultaneously, a false memory becomes a cultural truth. This version, the monocled mascot, appears in parodies, cartoons, even commercials. It's referenced in films and comedy sketches. So deeply embedded is this image that it overshadows the original, unaltered design. When reality contradicts memory, most people don't revise their beliefs. They revise the timeline. Maybe the design changed, they say. Maybe it was just the older version. But it wasn't. The Monopoly case underscores a striking truth. We remember not what was, but what should have been, according to the stories we tell ourselves. Memory, once again, proves not to be a camera, but a painter with a flair for style over substance. So the question becomes, how many of our mental snapshots are stylized portraits rather than true photographs? Next, we look at a familiar brand and a fruit basket that includes an object no one ever put there, except in their minds. It was there. You swear it was. A cornucopia, a woven horn of plenty, brimming with fruit. It sat behind the apples, grapes, and leaves on the fruit of the Loom logo. You remember the brown wicker curve, the way it framed the produce. You saw it on underwear packaging, laundry tags, and childhood clothing labels, but it was never there. Not once in the company's 170-year history has Fruit of the Loom used a cornucopia in its logo. Every version, from vintage to modern, shows only fruit, neatly clustered, but never spilling from a horn. Still, millions remember it vividly. The false memory exploded online in 2019. People posted hand-drawn sketches from memory, cornucopia included. They searched old shirts and tags, shocked to find it missing. That can't be right, they insisted. I learned what a cornucopia was from that logo. Dr. Carol Laney, a researcher in commercial memory, found this to be one of the most detailed, brand-related false memories ever recorded. Survey participants didn't just remember the object. They described its color, texture, and position. Brown, wicker, curved behind the fruit, tilted just so. Their accounts were consistent, specific, and entirely incorrect. So where did the cornucopia come from? It may begin with association. The fruit arrangement naturally evokes a harvest image. The mind, ever eager for meaning, adds the missing element, the horn of plenty, to complete the visual metaphor. And once added, the detail embeds itself deeply. But there's more. Logos are often seen, not studied. We glance, infer, fill in blanks. Over time, assumptions calcify into memories. Then culture picks them up. Parody logos, Halloween costumes, novelty t-shirts, and the false version circulates, reinforcing itself until it becomes the dominant image. Even confronted with the truth, many refuse to accept it. My shirt had it, they argue. I saw it 1,000 times. But vintage products show only fruit. Trademark filings, ad campaigns, company archives, no cornucopia. Ever. This case illustrates the power of confident misremembering. Memory doesn't just fade, it creates. It authors details that align with expectations and context. And when millions of people remember the same invented image, the false becomes familiar. There's something comforting about the cornucopia. It makes sense. It fits. It feels right. And perhaps that's why we chose to remember it that way. Not because it was there, but because it should have been. So we believed it was. What other details have we added unconsciously to the logos, labels, and icons of our lives? Next, we turn to cinema, to one of horror's most quoted lines that was never actually spoken. Hello, Clarice. It's the line that defines the silence of the lambs. A chilling greeting delivered with eerie calm by Dr. Hannibal Lecter as FBI trainee Clarice Starling steps into his cell. The words slither through pop culture, repeated in parodies, whispered at costume parties, etched into Halloween masks. Only it never happens. Anthony Hopkins, in his Oscar-winning performance, never says, "Hello, Clarice." His actual line is quieter, less theatrical. "Good evening, Clarice." That's it. Yet the false quote has become more famous than the real one. It's not just misremembered, it's remembered precisely. Fans recall the tone, the pacing, the chilling pause before the name. They can hear it. Some insist they saw the lips move with those exact words. But no version of the film, theatrical, director's cut, or otherwise, contains the phrase. Dr. Lynn Nuttall, a memory and emotion researcher, explored this case and found that over 70% of participants quoted, "Hello, Clarice," when asked to recall Lecter's first words. Many were shocked when shown the actual scene. Still, they resisted the correction. "I must have seen another version," they said. "It was definitely there, but it wasn't." So where did it come from? Part of the answer lies in cultural echo. The phrase sounds right. It's short, sinister, intimate. It fits Lecter's unsettling charm and has the cadence of a perfect movie quote. So when comedians, sketch shows, or fans paraphrased it, the line stuck, even though it never existed. As it spread, it replaced the truth. Each repetition reinforced the false memory until it became the only memory. By the time people revisited the film, their expectations drowned out the actual dialogue. Neurological studies of false memory formation show that repetition can implant confidence. The more we hear something, the more we believe we've always known it. Over time, the brain loses the distinction between hearing a phrase in real life versus hearing it echoed in culture. This isn't deception, it's construction. A scene, a feeling, a tone. And then a line that should be there. "Hello, Clarice" is perfect because it completes the image. It aligns with the mythos of Lecter, cold, calm, calculating. Our minds remember the character, not the script. And so the quote writes itself. The irony is that in misremembering, we created something more iconic than the original. And maybe that's the heart of the Mandela Effect. Not just error, but artistry. The subconscious crafting of a more poetic, more dramatic, more emotionally resonant version of reality. Next, we enter the world of childhood maps and global truths, where continents do something they were never supposed to do. Move. Maps aren't supposed to change. They're among the few constants we grow up with. Colorful atlases pinned to classroom walls, spinning globes on library desks. They ground us, literally. But what happens when the world you thought you knew shifts? For millions, that shift comes from a single, startling realization. South America isn't where they remember it. Ask most people to picture the Americas. They'll describe North America stacked directly above South America, a neat vertical alignment like two pieces of a puzzle. But pull out a real map and the illusion breaks. South America lies far to the east, its northern edge nearly level with Florida's. This isn't a trick. It's always been that way. Yet the collective shock suggests otherwise. In 2014, geography educators began noticing a strange trend. Students, and their parents, consistently misplace South America on blank maps. Not by a little, by entire countries. The placement was uniform and widespread. Dr. Sarah Cream-Reger, a spatial memory researcher, investigated further. What she found was astonishing. This wasn't a knowledge gap. It was a shared false memory. Across continents, people from various cultures recalled South America being directly south of North America, as if the two were joined along the same meridian. Even seasoned travelers, geography teachers, and pilots reported surprise when seeing its true position. Why? Part of the answer lies in childhood exposure. Simplified, rectangular map projections, especially Mercator-style maps, often exaggerate northern landmasses and compress southern ones. To fit these maps into standard formats, subtle distortions are made. Continents are stretched, squeezed, shifted. Over time, the brain doesn't just interpret the distortion. It internalizes it. The mental map we carry isn't built from direct observation. It's drawn from memory, repetition, and expectation. We recall the idea of geography more than the geography itself. Even when corrected, the false map lingers. People report feeling disoriented when flight paths or time zones don't match their mental models. Some even accuse modern maps of being new or edited. But the Earth hasn't moved. We have. What's compelling is the consistency of the error. Across demographics, ages, and regions, people make the same mistake, suggesting that our shared memory of the world is more about how we learned than what we learned. And in that realization lies something profound. The mind doesn't just store facts. It stores frameworks, shapes, stories. So when a continent moves, it's not just geography that's altered, it's trust. Trust in what we were taught. Trust in what we remember. Trust in the maps we thought were unchanging. Next, we shift from land to language and a queen's greeting that history insists never happened, even though you swear you heard it. In a quiet room, a camera rolls. An interviewer leans forward. A queen, not of royalty but of horror, waits with her lips poised. And then it comes. Mirror, mirror on the wall. Wait, we've been here before. No, this time the queen says something else, something many remember from a different kind of screen. Hello, Clarice? Except that greeting never happened either. We've already been told that, so perhaps now the question isn't whether our memories deceive us, but how far they go. Let's test another. Fruit of the Loom, Monopoly, Queen Lyrics, South America. We've doubted quotes, misremembered maps, reimagined logos. The foundation is shaking. And then we reach a moment that jolts the psyche, because it rewrites history itself. Think of the Fruit of the Loom logo again. You already know now that the cornucopia never existed. But what if this wasn't just a logo misstep? What if the very shape of remembered history, song lyrics, brand designs, film lines, never aligned with what really was? The Mandela Effect, named after the misremembered death of Nelson Mandela, isn't simply about confusion. It's about conviction. It's about people betting their understanding of reality on something they felt to be true, only to find themselves standing on air. Take a moment to consider this. How many of these false memories are genuinely yours? How many have you inherited from culture, media, or repetition? What happens when a memory is repeated often enough that it gains weight, emotional weight, social weight, even without evidence? This phenomenon isn't just about what we forget. It's about what we add. Dr. Henry Reuger once said that false memories don't replace real ones. They nest beside them, like shadows cast by a brighter light. And the brighter the moment. A childhood book, a beloved movie, a political tragedy, the more powerful the shadow becomes. As we revisit these anomalies, the pattern becomes clearer. We aren't just dealing with errors. We're watching the mind perform an ancient task, filling in blanks, resolving contradictions, turning scattered facts into story. Sometimes that story is more beautiful, more haunting, or more complete than the truth. And sometimes it isn't ours at all. Next, we'll close in on the final two puzzles, where time, memory, and culture collide, where fiction feels like fact and fact fades like a dream. He stood there, alive in motionless defiance, and then he was gone. The image of the tank man from Tiananmen Square has already shown us how memory can rewrite tragedy. But what happens when the mystery isn't just what we remember, but who? No one knows who the tank man was. His name, his fate, even his destination after stepping away from the tanks, all remain unknown. And yet millions remember his death as a certainty. Memory supplied the ending. This next case is even more elusive, the disappearance not of a man, but of words, the final line in a song, the extra passengers in a car, the monocle never worn, the South America that shifted, and now the movie quote that anchored an entire character, but was never spoken. "Play it again, Sam." It's one of the most quoted lines in cinematic history, evoked in tributes, cartoons, and bar conversations. Everyone knows it from Casablanca, where Humphrey Bogart, world-weary and heartbroken, asks the piano player to bring back a song and a lost love, but those words never appear in the film. Bogart never says, "Play it again, Sam." The actual lines are different, subtler, more fragmented. "Play it," he says, or "Play it once, Sam, for old time's sake." And later, Ingrid Bergman says, "Play it, Sam, play as time goes by." Yet the myth persists. So clearly do people remember the fictional quote that it became the title of a Woody Allen film. It's been etched into pop culture, engraved onto the identity of an entire film, and echoed far louder than the lines that actually existed. This isn't an isolated mistake. It's another example of narrative memory. The mind stitching together what should have been said, polishing it into a cleaner, punchier version. Something quotable. Something iconic. What's eerie is how often the false version is better, more emotionally satisfying, sharper, easier to recall. And so the mind keeps it, repeating it until it becomes more familiar than the original. These cultural ghosts haunt our memories, not as failures of recall, but as alternate histories crafted by expectation and repetition. By now, we've seen it everywhere. Logos, maps, film quotes, childhood books, even historical tragedies. The Mandela Effect isn't just a curiosity. It's a mirror, showing us how the collective mind prefers coherence over accuracy, poetry over fact. And the more we repeat a version of reality, no matter how fictional, the more real it becomes to us. Next, we arrive at the end of this journey, where all the threads converge, and we ask the one question no memory can fully answer. What is truth, if memory makes its own reality? What is truth when memory writes its own story? We began this journey with a man who didn't die, at least not when so many remember he did. From there, we wandered through mirrors that spoke the wrong words, bears whose names were never spelled the way we swore, continents that shifted beneath our feet, and movie lines that echo louder than any script. And through it all, one pattern emerged. The mind is not a vault. It is a storyteller. Each Mandela Effect case isn't just a mistake. It's a parable, a reflection of how our brains smooth edges, fill voids, and reshape the past to suit the emotional logic of our lives. A missing quote here, a misplaced horn of plenty there. These aren't failures of intelligence. They're demonstrations of how memory serves not truth, but meaning. Neuroscience confirms what our hearts suspect. False memories activate the same neural circuits as real ones. The mind doesn't know the difference, and neither sometimes do we. But maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe it's a clue. These shared false memories tell us something essential about being human. They reveal our longing for coherence, our need for narrative, our instinct to find patterns, even where none exist. They expose the scaffolding of culture, how repetition, design, and myth-making craft realities more enduring than fact. Think of the Monopoly man's monocle, a symbol of wealth so vivid we added it ourselves. Or, we are the champions of the world, a final note we gave Freddie Mercury, not because he needed it, but because we did. These are not random errors. They are the fingerprints of collective imagination. And what does it mean when millions remember the same false thing? It means that memory is not just personal. It's communal, a shared space where stories are passed, repeated, and reinforced, whether they're real or not. That's what makes the Mandela Effect more than a curiosity. It's a window into the architecture of belief, into the invisible bonds that connect us, not through certainty, but through shared illusions. These are the myths of the modern age. Logos we all wore, lyrics we all sang, images we all saw that never were. So we arrive here, not with answers, but with awe. Because maybe the real mystery isn't that memory can be wrong. It's that we ever believed it was a record to begin with, instead of what it truly is. A living, shifting story stitched from feeling, repetition, and need. And in that story, we find something eternal, not perfect recall, not photographic truth, but the beautiful, flawed echo of what it means to be human, always reaching backward, reshaping the past, and calling it memory. That's not an error, that's art, and perhaps the real truth.